The Civil Society Water, Sanitation and Hygiene, or WASH Fund, is an Australian initiative supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade over a 4-year lifetime and runs between 2013 and 2018. This is the second round of the fund, and it works in 19 countries with total grant funding of around 93 million Australian dollars. There's a strong emphasis on learning as part of the overall management of the fund, and regular learning events are held at both regional and global levels to share good practice and discuss challenges. My name is Harold Lockwood. My area of speciality is in sustainability of WASH interventions, including institutional and policy issues, governance, financing and monitoring of rural water supplies. And I was involved as a topic expert in the Southern African learning event of the fund. In this region, the CS WASH Fund operates in 4 countries. They are Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique and Zimbabwe, and it works in urban, peri-urban and rural contexts, with projects being implemented by 6 civil society organisations, or CSOs, namely Welthungerhilfe, World Vision, WaterAid, Plan International, Concern Universal and the Australian Red Cross. In early May 2015, these CSOs and their counterparts in local government and national NGOs came together for a 4-day learning event in Harare, Zimbabwe. The overarching theme of the event was CSOs working together with local governments for improved sustainable WASH services. More specifically, the event was designed to bring together partners from the different countries to share their challenges and experiences, to showcase good practice and think through potential solutions. The WASH Fund also used this as an opportunity to revisit the fund's theory of change. Throughout the week, plenary and working sessions, the participants focused on a number of key themes, including WASH services, monitoring of WASH services, financing, aid alignment and harmonisation. Participants also worked on what we called a personal action plan throughout the week, both to follow up their own learning objectives and to record concrete actions which they could then follow up after the event within their own organisations. The WASH sector in the Southern African region faces a number of challenges, both with low coverage of improved facilities, but also in terms of maintaining physical infrastructure to deliver those services, as well as sustaining positive behaviour changes. For example, around 174 million people still lack basic sanitation services in the region, and there are over 100 million people without access to safe water. In common with many countries in Africa, and indeed globally, the 4 countries in the Regional WASH Fund have undergone processes of sector reform and of decentralisation of governance functions for WASH service delivery. All 4 countries have a relatively well-established framework for decentralisation which describes the processes, but also all of them face serious challenges around putting these into practice. This is in terms of adequate fiscal decentralisation to go along with devolution of authority, but also in terms of human and managerial capacity at local government level. There is also broader trends across all of the countries of unplanned and unregulated urbanisation and of course population pressure. The host country Zimbabwe specifically faces a crippling economic crisis that has hollowed out the government's ability to meet its commitments for even basic services to its citizens. As an example, as of May 2015, local government staff had not been paid for over 6 months in the country. Many of these constraints and challenges are of course shared globally when considering the pace and scope of decentralisation, which is often incomplete or stalled, and where central line ministries don't always support the transition of real decision-making power down to lower levels. It's against this challenging backdrop that CSOs must operate and find their way through a complex operating environment. What is their real added value? Should they be involved in direct service provision or only work on capacity building or on issues such as advocacy? Which costs should they be responsible to support, and who else will pay for the other costs involved in service delivery? The 4-day event was designed to provide a mix of plenary presentations, discussions, panel debate, self-learning approaches and sharing of experiences, as well as a day in the field to see ongoing projects being supported by the fund. Throughout the course of these various activities, a number of themes kept recurring and are worth highlighting as areas for further reflection and action for both CSOs and their partners. Firstly, financing was recognised as a critical area, both because the true costs involved in delivering sustained services over time have not really been identified, but also because current financing sources are inadequate. Participants agreed that when services are improved, there is the greater likelihood of more and more regular tariff payments coming from users. They were also clear that more public sector financing is required for long-term capital maintenance, without which small problems can escalate and become much more costly in the end. The third element of the 3 T's, so-called, that's tariffs, public taxation, which has largely been inadequate in the past, is aid transfers. And we know that development aid is under scrutiny in many countries and is likely to either remain static or even to fall in real terms in coming years. The next common issue in the event that was raised was linked to financing and involves the political dimension, the political economy, if you like, and its influence on WASH service delivery. All country groups recognise this as a critical issue and reflected in a number of ways, including the support that is provided, or more critically when this is not provided, by central to local levels of government. One of the most pressing ways in which this is manifested is around tariff setting, both at the local level through the issuing of bylaws which may limit tariffs to unrealistically low levels, or by restrictions set by central government on the ability of local authorities to raise adequate revenue. The issue of tariff setting and collection is particularly challenging in urban areas where communities are often unwilling to pay for unreliable service provision, so establishing a vicious cycle. As one participant reflected, we cannot afford to ignore the current community mindset which does not acknowledge the need to pay for WASH services. Without addressing this, we will not be in a position to retrieve adequate funding for improved levels of service delivery. This politicisation and desire for populist measures, especially around the time of elections, often undermines the sustainability of WASH. In extreme cases, such as the recent ruling in Zimbabwe, central government unilaterally removed all debts owing to local government, which wiped out potential funding at a stroke, but perhaps more critically may undermine any culture of payment in the long term. A third area, or important theme of the event, was around partnerships and the need for better transparency and accountability. This is typically thought of in terms of greater transparency on the part of local government to be more proactive about involving local citizens in planning and decision making. But it was also interesting to see the depth of feeling amongst participants in terms of demand and desirability of the reverse transparency, that's to say for CSOs to share more information about what they may bring to the table. This means sharing their own plans and budgets so that local government and other partners are clear on the scale and scope of what is and what is not available in terms of resources and the objectives of these CSO projects. Finally, there are a number of exercises to reflect on the approaches or modalities of working between CSOs and local governments across the different countries. The WASH Fund piloted a strategy mapping exercise which asked organisations to reflect on how they interact on a spectrum within their projects, from direct service provision on the one hand all the way through to working to support and strengthen government on the other, with limited direct interventions on the ground. The results of this exercise indicated a wide range of experiences driven by both country context, that's to say in some areas there is a pressing need and a gap in government capacity where they just simply can't meet this humanitarian need, and in terms of the maturity of the sector and the development of the broader enabling environment, by which we mean the policies, strategies and government institutions, as well as the ability of the private sector to take on more of this direct service provision role. At least one senior CSO manager said that as a result of the strategy mapping and the discussions generally at the learning event, that they would no longer go do direct delivery in their programs. This change and this commitment will have to be followed up and monitored going forward. On the final morning of the learning event, an intentionally provocative statement was put to a panel of experts claiming the following statement: CSOs have no role in direct service delivery of WASH. This prompted a lively debate across the panel and in further questions and reflections from participants. The consensus in the end was to disagree with this, and the conclusion was that the overall role of CSOs in the WASH Fund is a largely positive one, not only to meet these glaring needs, but to fill a number of critical functions that can complement service provision by government and others, such as the private sector. Most notably, these included making links between users, consumers and other grassroots organisations, such as residents' associations, with the local government, to improve the flow of information, accountability and trust, so very much playing a brokering role in both directions. This was recognised as being particularly important for highlighting the needs and rights of the most vulnerable, including women and children and people with disabilities. And in this area, the representative from the Federation of Disabled People in Zimbabwe, Mr. Ishmael Zhao, put it very well when he reflected on this. He said, There are gaps in the inclusion of people with disabilities in WASH. At a village level committee, there needs to be representative with a disability so that they can highlight these issues. We have policies in place at a national level for WASH in Zimbabwe in this case, but disability is not mentioned. My request to decision makers is to please include people with disabilities from the water point to the village to the district and right up through to the national level. No one is representing the aspirations of people with disabilities, and WASH must cater for everyone. Another critical area of added value which is recognised is in providing so-called software interventions, especially around community engagement and hygiene promotion and behaviour change, which are areas where typically local government is not at its strongest. And thirdly, CSOs were seen to have a key function in testing and innovation of both new technologies and approaches, and to support government in short learning cycles and to improve areas that are often neglected or underfunded. Again, the work on access for people with disabilities in Malawi and Zimbabwe, which is being supported by the fund, were seen as good examples. One observation from the discussions at the event was that CSOs are doing a lot more than what might have traditionally been considered as their WASH work in terms of limited to simple water points or household latrines. Several of these projects are dealing with large-scale and complex urban water supply systems and sewerage networks, for example. But this also means, conversely, that CSOs have to recognise where they may have weaknesses and limitations, and they should get in more specialised support, for example, around tariff projections and calculations, asset management and engineering designs. So there is a real danger of overreach to try and do everything in-house. In closing and looking ahead, a number of key issues are important to bear in mind for CSOs and working with their local government partners. Understand your context. So look beyond the immediate project setting and assess the policy, institutional and financing frameworks, as well as the limits and opportunities for your local government partners, and see where you can add real value. Even though you may be involved in direct service provision today as a CSO, consider what your exit strategy might look like and do this early on, and how capacity can be built along the way and put in place so that in the medium to long term you'll be able to exit and shift to a more indirect support role. And finally, to capitalise on your added value and to do the things that local government may struggle with, such as software delivery in terms of hygiene promotion and behaviour change. As the nature and scale of aid changes from the long established models of grants being channeled through to CSOs to a much more complex landscape, including concessionary loans, a greater role for private sector organisations, so CSOs have to adapt and show where and how they can have the greatest impact.